So, remembering that we are now in week 7, we're starting to think about pulling together all of those elements that are going to be vital come race day itself. And one of those is absolutely bang on the fueling. And this is round about the time to start thinking where we're going to look to for that fueling. So, it is our great honour this week to be joined by Wendy Rogers, who is one of those faces behind all of the research and design that goes into how those gels work, how those specialist drinks work, and hopefully can really fill us in on lots of great advice about where to turn to, what sort of thing to look for, and what will work best for you come race day. So thanks for joining us, Wendy.
Hi there, Paula. Pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Wendy, for coming on.
So one of the first things that we were talking about before we sat down to record this, Tomo and I were discussing, I guess, the different generations going back in marathon running. So in my generation, gels were only just really starting to come in. And the really specialist running gels that we have now that are so well absorbed without the gastrointestinal side effects really didn't happen. So a lot of the focus that I had to put in was really that pre-race fueling, so making sure that all of the glycogen stores throughout your body were really topped off. And then I relied largely on drinks to keep my fuel levels topped up. So I would be taking those in little and often all the way through warm-up right up to race start time, and then every 5k trying to get as much as I could in there with a real kind of, I guess, emphasis on making the drinks stronger in terms of the carbohydrate concentration within the drinks as the race wore on. So my 40k drinks bottle, for example, would be so sweet and so strong that probably normally any other time I wouldn't have been able to stomach it. But at that time, I just needed a sugar hit, a carb hit to get me through that last 2k, because what I was trying to do was redline through in terms of keep it on the anaerobic threshold. So we talked a couple of weeks ago with Andy Jones, and we talked about his advice for how to basically run your fastest marathon. And it's really to ride that line at the lactate threshold where you're not producing so much that you can't continue, but you are really eating into those glycogen reserves because you're not relying on fat reserves by any means. You're running as hard as you can maintain over that marathon distance. And then if we fast forward into Tomo's era, you kind of crossed over, didn't you? And you had more of those proper gels, as I term it. So you would use them more consistently rather than drinks, would you?
Yeah, I sampled both sides of the kind of revolution, I guess. I actually did it with a fat, carbo loading and also heavily fat side of things, But Wendy, so you're with the challenges around an athlete trying to run a marathon. What are the kind of challenges a body faces when it comes to that extreme exercise and marathon, and the basics around that? What are the limitations towards an athlete running a marathon?
It does tend to be the replenishment of fuel stores, I think, and it's helpful to understand how that works, because we use the term glycogen a lot, and you guys are aware of that. You want that in your muscles. You want to be, and as you were saying, Paula, historically there would have been carb loading and stuff to try and make sure that those were full. I think it can be useful to know the difference between the fuels that we're taking in and the glycogen itself. And so we bandy about the word glucose and the word glycogen without necessarily sort of showing what those mean. And glucose is the molecule that we would use to transport the energy around our body in our blood. And then once that gets into our cells, muscle cells, and also liver cells, then it can be sort of rebuilt up into the glycogen that we actually use for fuel. So that's, I think, a helpful thing to know what's actually happening in the body. The progress with fuel was trying to find the easiest way of getting glucose into the blood so that it can start replenishing things as quickly as possible. So historically, when carb loading was happening, complex carbohydrates can take sort of hours or even sort of days to really sort of refill everything, because it takes your body some time to digest it. You're using energy in the digestion process. If your body isn't actively exercising at the time, it might choose to store some of that glucose in its liver cells, not in its muscle cells. So there's the time that we choose to sort of take on those carbohydrates can affect where it gets stored. So with that in mind, I think while we don't use, well, we do use quite a lot of glucose in our gels, and in most of the drinks that you'd have had historically would have been using that. There is now an interest in some other molecules that allow that glucose to get in through a few different channels. It can really get in every which way at the right time during the exercise, so that it's going to the muscles immediately.
So in effect, that your journey that you've been on, so when obviously an athlete will have their stores going into a race largely through food.
Yes.
So that it's a large proportion of food, but we talk a lot about how effectively the food stores or the glycogen stores that we have through food takes us to around the 20-mile mark or whatever however you want to see it, but there's a limit to how much we can carry on the start line of a race. And so these gels, their job effectively is to get from the mouth into the muscle or into usable energy as quickly as possible. So how do these gels, that when you're designing them with the team, what are the sort of things, the type of sugars and the type of things that find it easier to get to convert into energy to use on race day within the heat of the battle or in the window before and during the racing?
So, as glucose is the molecule that we're aiming to get into the blood, that is sort of a first and foremost for us, particularly for the gels that I've designed. The glucose syrup will be sort of a primary, and your body will take that in very, very quickly. But we will also support this with maltodextrin, which has a slightly different sort of entrance channel. So the glucose will just sort of be able to pass straight over cell walls, while maltodextrin still goes in very quickly, but your body will secrete something called maltase. It's an enzyme that helps it bring across. And so you've then got the glucose passing over as it would, as quickly as it can. And then you've got maltase also bringing over other energy, and so you've got two systems bringing it into the bloodstream rather than just one, and that helps speed that up. We also do see, and some of our gels have this and some of our drinks have this, we will also sometimes use fructose as well. That also gets into the system very quickly, but it needs to be adjusted by the liver into glucose. And so it's an ever so slightly slower release, but we'll get in fast through a different channel and then be adjusted and ready to use as well. So we're trying to access as many different points as possible to get the glucose into the bloodstream. Once you've got the glucose into the body, there is an element of technique that comes in after that to make sure that everything circulates well. And this is where runners are encouraged to try and stay loose, stay relaxed, to make sure that as the blood flows around, you're not sort of so tense that it can't sort of get into the muscles.
That's fascinating. So in terms of, so the actual, when athletes think about their tensing up, they're slowing down because mechanically they're restricted, but you're also saying being relaxed in the running motion actually enables the fuel to get into your muscles easier.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is crucial.
Yeah.
That's a really, really key point. And I think, well, some of the interaction that we had on Instagram, Wendy, when we talked a little bit about fueling before, we had people saying, well, listen, I can run a marathon, no problem, without taking anything on. I can do that. And yes, that's true, isn't it? The human body, if you're strong and tough and if you're endurance-based, you can do that. But what we're trying to say is that with the proper fueling and with the right fueling for you, you can run faster and you can run as fast as you're capable of doing. So that's really what we're trying to do, is make the body more efficient.
Down effect. It's the slowing down effect, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, all of these things are to sort of polish what we've already got going for us. And humans are naturally endurance runners and hunters. That's how we would have evolved. And so it is natural for us to be able to run incredible distances. I mean, this is to help make running more accessible to those people who sort of aren't sort of trained to an athletic standard as well. So a bit of fuel to sort of help along makes sense, I think, for everyone, really.
Yeah.
For an athlete or for any of us that as we're getting ready to race, what is the kind of, because we spoke before about the interesting, for me, one of the interesting things you talked about was how to prepare the stomach. Or to get the stomach into an optimal condition and to maximise the gels, because it'd be interesting to hear more about the different variety of gels and what they specifically do, but also what someone can do to sort of get themselves, because obviously there's that a kind of agreeableness of things to sit on your stomach and how best to absorb it, and that everyone's different, but what the kind of things someone should be thinking about to get their stomach ready to absorb and best use these gels.
Do you mean on race day in particular?
Yes, on race day in particular.
On race day in particular, okay. I mean, one of the most important things when you're getting to race day is to certainly not be trying anything new. I would hope by the time you've got to race day that you've had plenty of time to try different gels and to figure out which ones you want to use on the day and which ones that suit you. Once you've actually got to race day, and I think, Tomo, you've mentioned before that the process of getting to the race and the marathon and everything and the travel in the morning and so on can be tricky for people to sort of be able to have a proper breakfast or keep their routine going and stuff. It's still very much encouraged to have a good breakfast, but you don't want to still be digesting at the point that you start to run. The process of digestion is quite energy intensive in itself and requires your body to direct a lot of its blood and resources to its core in order to digest. And so you want to have had breakfast sort of an hour to 2 hours before you intend to start running, and to pick a breakfast that you're familiar with. If you know that you're going to be travelling and you're not going to be able to have like a standard food breakfast that you are familiar with, then try different sort of meal replacement breakfasts or even sort of, I don't know, overnight oats or things like that you can pick up on the go. But again, make sure that you're not doing anything new on race day. Make sure that your body's very familiar with that and digests it well and gets through to the start of the race with the stomach pretty much empty, if possible. So that all of that digestion is done with and you're ready to start sort of running and going. So the way that the gels will then interact is that they don't need much digestion at all, and that's rather the point. We don't want, when refueling your body to have to use any of its fuel to do the digestion part, because that would be sort of counterproductive. So ideally, the fuel is hitting your stomach. Your stomach is identifying that there's very little that it needs to do to it, and is letting it straight through into and past the duodenum, which is where you would usually digest protein, and into the small intestine where real absorption can start to happen. With glucose and maltodextrin and fructose, with these ones that are designed to be very quick, glucose and glycogen replenishment can start almost immediately for the body, which is what we want. Whereas for more complicated foodstuffs, it can take sort of an hour before your body's ready to start absorbing anything at all.
So it's not sometimes I think when I'm running, I take a gel and then I think, oh, right, I feel much better now. Sometimes I think a little bit of that is in the mind. And I have been told in the past, so my drinks that I talked about used to be very heavily fructose. And someone did say to me once that the brain can be slightly fooled by the taste buds in your mouth. So the minute the sugar hits your taste buds, your brain thinks ahead and knows it's getting the energy and kind of gets that energy surge. But we're not totally in our heads, are we? If we're thinking we've taken the gel and now 2-3 minutes later we feel good again.
You're certainly not totally in your head, and it's like 2-3 minutes later you'll feel good again. But also, as you said, the taste of the sweetness, it's not just tricking your brain, it is actually having an effect. So as you taste the sweetness, your body starts to prepare for there being a sugar intake and will release insulin and other things sort of in preparation for that. And it's insulin that instructs the body to pull the glucose into places for storage for glycogen. So yes, you will have, while you're running, you'll still have some glucose running like loose around your system in your blood. And then you have the gel, and that immediately triggers your body to go, oh, we can take some of this glucose out of the blood now, and put it into the muscle and keep using that, because we know we're going to get more soon.
So we've gone through the breakfast. I mean, I think I used to do 3 hours before, 3.5 hours before.
I did as well.
Just to make sure that I was totally, but then I would keep sipping on the drink all the way through. Would you advise now taking gels in that space to the race, or waiting until the race actually gets underway?
Personally, would be encouraging, leading up to the race, one of the more sort of hydration drink based things that do still have the sugar content. You're not looking to sort of sieve anything out, but you still want to have your hydration and salts high as well.
Yeah.
So for example, we have an isotonic hydration drink that I'm very fond of just day to day as well, actually, but that would prep the body for the fact that it's about to run and sweat, but you're at that point you've still got quite high glycogen, you haven't started the run yet, so you don't need to be necessarily, I think, sipping the stronger sort of glucose gels. You'd be more looking to make sure that you've got the water, nominal sugar, and your electrolytes.
So a little shout out to HIGH5. That's what I actually took years and years and years ago. I was racing in the World Championships in Seville and predicted 40-degree temperatures for a 10,000 metre race. So the old HIGH5 hydration, which used to be a little bottle you'd squeeze and fill a little thing at the top and then tip that into your 500ml bottle. I actually got through 9 litres of water, liquid, in the day mixed with that, and it got me through that race so well that I shocked all the medics, because I came off the track, went straight into doping control and said, right, I can pee now straight away, please, and get out of here. And they were flabbergasted that I managed to do that. But I carried that through. But when I got to race day then for the marathon, it would be mixed with my fructose glucose type drink in there as well, just to make sure, particularly with temperature. So I guess that's what a long-winded way of working into. If the marathon temperature, now London, we're building towards, it's not generally hot temperatures, but if you were to get warm temperatures on marathon day itself, should you pay more attention to the hydration, or will it take care of itself?
I personally, and this is from a sort of vaguely medical background as well, would encourage paying more attention to hydration and fueling. I think that fueling, the worst that can happen if you run out of fuel is that you need to sort of pause maybe and take a bit more on. Whereas if you run out of your hydration, nothing terrible is going to happen, but it can knock you out of the race basically. Yeah. You would have to potentially absolutely stop, where as opposed to just sort of pausing for a bit more of a refuel. Dehydration has quite a lot of different effects on the body, but when I was young, I used to work with St John's Ambulance just as a cadet when I was younger, and one of the first main duties that I went on was for the Great South Run. I grew up in Portsmouth, and I was on duty in the main medical tent there for the Great South Run, and saw what happened to someone who and it's not like Portsmouth is a very warm place either, like London, but did see someone who had fully dehydrated and what a dehydrative fit looks like. And they were safe, and you will be sort of looked after, but there's no way that they were carrying on running after that. And it's quite distressing to the body as it runs out of its fluids like that.
I think to that point, understanding, so for someone to understand the hydration process, because that's something that my coach would say a lot to me around just taking on water. Instinctively we think that's just a good thing, but actually that's quite an energy demand on the body, because you've got to put the salts in. So for someone to understand the difference between basically isotonic and a hypertonic drink and that hydration process, just to actually, because I'm not versed in it and I'm still learning, but categorically how that works and what those mean. Sometimes
drinking just plain water is good. Particularly plain water would be good if you're trying to sort of flush through your renal system. Plain water is the sort of thing that can sort of go through and then come out the other side quite quickly to sort of clean. Whereas when we're talking about proper hydration, we don't want the water to just pass straight through. We want it to go into us properly and rehydrate all of our systems. It's sort of our coolant, really, and if we run low on that, then it's quite dangerous. In order for our body to pull water into itself properly, if it is pure water, we'll need to add some salts of its own and even some glucose or some sugars of its own to change the water to be very similar in its what we call osmolality, which is the amount of stuff in it. To change that to be as similar to our cellular fluid as possible. So we want it to be very close to what our cells are like, and then it can pull the water across into a similar fluid. So what we've done when we make isotonic or hypertonic drinks is to get it very close already and do the work for our bodies beforehand of getting the right amount of salts and sugar into that so that it doesn't have to use its own methods for that. Isotonic is when it's precisely what our intracellular fluid is at. While hypertonic is where it's ever so slightly more watery, but still quite close to our cells and allows us to sort of pull that across. The official term for it is a carbohydrate electrolyte solution, and it has registered claims with the EU and the UK governing bodies to clarify that for use in sports, this definitely hydrates you. This is guaranteed to allow your body to pull that water across much faster.
Now, just to go back to the gels, Wendy, when would you advise to take them during the run? How often? Bearing in mind that for a lot of the runners, they're probably going to have to carry those gels with them. unless they use one of the specific gel stations that the marathon do provide, but there aren't as many of those. And also, when would be the best time? I'm guessing you're going to say now, as we're starting to ramp up the long runs, but it's worth trying out different types just to find one that works for you, because we are all a little bit unique, right?
Absolutely. You absolutely must start practicing soon to make sure that you found the one that works for you. Different companies will have different options, and HIGH5 themselves has our own options there. We have an energy gel that's a bit sort of thicker and syrupy, and we also have an aqua gel that's got a bit more sort of wateriness to it that someone might find just easier to sip or easier on the mouth or the stomach. Other gels might include certain things like gelling agents or thickeners. These don't sort of change the function of the gel in terms of how the energy will get in, but sometimes people might find that the thickener or the gelling agent helps soften its first hit on the stomach before it passes through. And so we still encourage people to sort of try different things and see how they work. As to your question about when they should be starting or how often they should be using them in the run, even that is quite subjective, and this is where the practice part comes in, and the person, while they're training for their run, should be trying to train while they're in the state that they expect to be in for the run. So that includes having eaten a little while before. As you were saying, you were 3 hours before when you would have breakfast or whatever. If they're expecting to be starting to run in the morning, then they should be training at the same sort of time of day, and they should be getting used to taking those gels that they want to try on the empty stomach while they're running, and seeing how that works for them. And seeing at what point they would sort of like to start taking those on and how they would use them.
I'm trying to come back to run a marathon in Tokyo and Boston to tick off the 6. But I'm not trying to go anywhere close to my personal best. So when I was trying to break the world record and trying to run personal bests, I was absolutely, as Tomo said, fueling every not quite 15 minutes, maybe 16 minutes, but every 5K I was topping up with fuel, and it was really important that I didn't miss particularly early bottles in terms of fueling there. Whereas now when I'm going out, I'm really just thinking in my head, I want to get round and enjoy it, and relatively it's going to be probably around about an hour slower than my very best. So I'm carrying one gel with me, and I'm starting to take that, because that's the other thing, I now have to carry it. I'm starting to take that somewhere between 1 hour 15 and 1 hour 30 in. And then take other top-ups every 25 minutes or so from there on. Does that sound sensible, or is that silly?
That sounds closer to what I'd have assumed for someone who wasn't trying to really sort of hit a personal best as a professional athlete. I would expect someone to sort of run a bit first and get into the run and get settled into their pace a bit, and then consider sort of fueling. And I was going to say maybe half hour to an hour into the run, you'd start sort of considering starting the top-up process then. That seems reasonable to me. I do think that while you might not be taking it right from the start in the way that a professional athlete would, they're probably... I suspect there is more fuel usage needed to run in 5 to 6 hours than there is in the sort of 2 to 3 mark, because you are still, even if you're not running full pelt, you're still running. That activity, that length of time actually will be probably taking more energy overall. I was trying to find sort of an analogy for this, and it's kind of like maybe a mileage on a car or something, actually. Like the more efficient an engine is, the less sort of fuel it needs, and the better sort of mileage you get for that fuel. If you've got an engine that's not polished perfectly to specification, then it will need more fuel to get the same distance, and will take a bit slower to do so. And that's something that we can prepare for and be ready for. But yeah, I think I would expect someone taking 5 to 6 hours to maybe need to be sort of potentially carrying a bit more gel than someone who's about to just really sprint through that.
And we wanted to touch a little bit on the caffeine side of things a little bit as well. So again, for I got asked this a few days ago, and my analogy is with caffeine is a lot what you just said about not doing anything different on the day. So I'm a kind of a 1 coffee in the morning, maybe a second one as a treat, but I'm not used to a lot of caffeine. So in a 2-hour race, if I took caffeine before a marathon, I'd get almost a caffeine low. So I wouldn't have a caffeine drink before I raced. Unlike any other distance, I would always, if I did a half, I'd have a coffee before. But before a marathon, I wouldn't, and I would have 1 caffeine gel around halfway, So it would kind of delay that, because I couldn't handle doing one before and one during. It was too much for me. So for that kind of advice, where would you, especially someone who's taken 5 or 6 hours, obviously the challenges around that, or even 3 hours, I assume don't overdo it compared to what you use and stagnate it, or even don't bother at all. What would you...
Again, very important to have practiced this pre-race day to find out at what point and how well your body can handle that. Ideally, never be doing anything that you're not sort of, particularly with caffeine and other stimulants, just not used to. Like you want for that to be a familiar sensation as that kicks in. As I understand it, and seeing feedback on some of our products as well, caffeine seems to sort of help people through the last push. So maybe in the final hour, if they were feeling like they were flagging and they were familiar with the caffeine hit from a gel, that might be of use to them. I would recommend not using caffeine unless you're confident in your hydration state and made sure that you because it's a diuretic and it will dehydrate. So even if you had a caffeine gel on you and you got towards the end of the race, if it had been hot that day and you were feeling like you might be sort of slightly dehydrated, you might want to skip out on that in case that tips you over the edge. It's worth noting that will have an effect in that direction as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can still remember a time when people actually put flat Coke or flat Red Bull in their drinks bottles at the elite end of marathon running. So it's really fascinating just listening how far the understanding of nutrition and particularly marathon fueling nutrition has come in that time. So I think wrapping up in terms of the fact that we're now at week 7, so people have got 8-9 weeks to go into marathon itself, and we're talking about now being the point where you start to ramp up the distance of your long run to get to your longest run, what about between 5 and 3 weeks out. So now is absolutely the right time to start trying whether they're going to use those gels. And I guess the other point, just touching on, a lot of people listening might have not actually tried out gels yet. And some of the people that I chat to will do little things that work for them, like carrying a packet of jelly babies or jelly beans and just getting those down them if they're easier to stomach. So in terms of trying out, would your advice from this be to try out one of each within the range of those gels? So from the very gloopy to the most liquid ones. And that's my really untechnical term. But trying out somewhere in that range just to see what works for them, because I think the big point we're trying to stress is listen to your body, and we're all individual. Find what your stomach and your brain likes the most.
Absolutely. I would, if I were to be training, I would be reaching out for while I design my own, I would still be reaching out and trying all sorts of different things just to see how my body was handling them. I would know my body fairly well, and I think people do already know their bodies well. So if you already know about yourself that you don't like thickener, or that you find sort of gelatinous tastes off-putting and you prefer something thinner, then you don't have to force yourself to try everything that you feel like you already know you're not going to like. But it's worth just having an idea of what's out there and starting to see which ones seem to actually sort of have the effect that you're looking for. And yeah, at this point, as early as possible, really, it's good to make sure that you've got that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's absolutely fascinating. And on behalf of everybody listening, I'm sure they have also picked up some great tips there. So thank you for your time and patience explaining that.
And it's my pleasure, my absolute pleasure.
We are very, very proud to be supporters by Children with Cancer UK in bringing you this special series. And this episode, we are going to hear from the CEO of the charity, Ayman Aha, who has a very special message he would like to share with you, not only about the importance of the money that you raise for the charity, but also about the actual importance of you going out there and running for this cause.
Hi, I'm Ayman Aha. I'm the proud CEO of Children with Cancer UK. Today, 10 families heard the stark words, "Your child has cancer." Every day, 10 families get diagnosed with paediatric cancer in one form or the other. However, the stark reality is, 2 of those families that heard those words today will not make it through the end. We're doing 2 things here. we're raising vital funds to support the 3 pillars of our charity. We raise awareness about paediatric cancer, we fund research, and we support welfare for the families. I'm extremely grateful that we have one of the largest running teams in London Marathon. However, on the day, it doesn't just bring out runners, it brings out families, it unites people. When you hear people cheering for each other, from the side, supporters, calling out names that are actually on shirts, it means a lot. The support gets you around. My personal experience at London Marathon was so special when you feel compelled to help the runners along the way. It's tough, but let's all appreciate the journey that the families are going through to fight cancer. They're on a tough course as well. The 26.2 miles that you run are really, really important to charities, especially Children with Cancer UK. It's those vital funds that go on to embrace the families and allows us to continue this work we do. We embrace for today with hope for tomorrow.
Thank you very much to Amar for that message. Children with Cancer UK has the largest number of charity runners in the London Marathon with 1,200 spots. And remember to donate to Children with Cancer UK, or to find out more about the incredible work that they do, there is a link in our description. And that is, I'm afraid, all that we have got time for this week. It has flown by. And thank you once again to Wendy Rogers for those absolute gems of little energy sound bites and things to carry us through the rest of the training that she's added this week. Do not forget to email us your questions at hello@paulasrunpod.com, to follow us on Apple and Spotify. And thank you so much for those of you that are doing that and that are pushing the message out there, and on Instagram at Paula's Run Pod and Paula's Marathon Run Club. It's a Viral Tribe entertainment production, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.